Okay. All right, you guys. So finally, Dr. Rathod got here after trying to be lost for 15 minutes. It's confusing around here.
On the other side, building A and B, and looking for blue awnings.
There's two of them.
Nice.
That's why it's confusing.
Just before a presentation.
Okay, so Dr. Rathod received her medical degree, and I'm sure you guys read this on some of the invitation if you got it. Kilpauk Medical College in Chennai, India. She completed residency in internal medicine from University of Illinois in Champaign. And she then completed her internship in rheumatology from Washington University, St. Louis, and she holds a board certification in functional medicine as well. Okay, so this is a personal note. I first met Dr. Rathod, and I meant to ask you, when did Dr. Walker?
2000.
It was in 2000 he retired? Okay. So Dr. Harvey Walker used to, he was kind of a pioneer in functional medicine in this St. Louis area. And in 2000, Dr. Rathod took over his practice as he retired. And she was, she was the only doctor that understood my mother's medical issues and treated her with great care and respect. I will always honor her for taking such good care of her whole body, mind, and spirit, and not just her disease. Over the years, she has required keen insight into subtle imbalances of the body that can lead to altered levels of function, which result in disease states. I wanted her to talk on these things in hopes that we can all become medical detectives for ourselves and learn to identify triggers that can contribute to these imbalances. And this is Dr. Rathod.
Yeah, I'll introduce myself.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. First, how many doctors in the room? Oh, man. Okay. I was hoping they would learn, too.
Well, we were hoping Dr.
I was really hoping that at least one doctor would be in the room. How many of you truly have myositis? And how many are there to support the person with myositis? Okay, so all of us. So this is a talk about myositis, but it's really a talk about how to take care of yourself, okay, and to know something called the upstream causes of medicine. All right, so what you're going to learn today is, first, I am a functional medicine practitioner, so I'm an internist and a rheumatologist by training. And in addition, I've also been practicing integrative medicine. And in 2008-9, I started to look at something called functional medicine, which is really a heuristic of how to think about medicine, okay? So it's not really a different kind of medicine. It's just really a way of thinking. I like to think about the pilot, I forget his name, who landed on the Hudson River. You know, Scully, right? So if you remember, he's on a flight trying to make a decision of how to land this plane as birds hit his wing, right? And he's told to go 7 miles away to the airport to land, or he's heading straight on the Hudson River and could land, and there are no barges and could do it pretty safely. He made the decision to land here, and that is called a heuristic. A heuristic is using all the knowledge that you require to come up with a plan. And that's what functional medicine is. It's a heuristic. It's not a different kind of medicine. You could be a chiropractor, a nutritionist. You could be you using functional medicine because it's a way of thinking. So there's no way I can do this talk without telling you a little bit about what functional medicine is and then taking you into the myositis and what we can do there, okay? So let's be patient with me as you learn about functional medicine. So what you're going to do is learn about functional medicine, then learn a little bit about the mitochondria, which is where the problem is in myositis, and then you're going to learn about how mitochondrial dysfunction and autoimmune disease is what then leads to your myopathies. And then finally, you're not going to learn about the different diseases. I'll take that as questions later. I'm not going to do conventional medical therapy. I'm not here to down conventional medical therapy. I absolutely value my traditional training. Without it, I couldn't be who I am today. So I hope I'm not offending anybody who's on chemotherapy or drugs. That is not the purpose of this talk. Okay, next slide, please. Right, so functional medicine, the principles are this. You are an individual. You're unique genetically. Your environment that you're exposed to is unique, even if you're an identical twin. And therefore, we should treat you as such and not treat you as if you have dermatomyositis and put you into a protocol for dermatomyositis or whatever name myopathy, but instead treat you as an individual with that disease. It's patient-centered. That's what that means. It talks about the dynamic balance that the human body has with the external environment that changes the internal environment. And also, you're inside your body, everything is connected. Even though you and I may not know how, everything is connected. And that connection is what we are looking and using to go upstream to understand you. We always look at diseases in medicine, but really I want for you to start thinking as health as being vitality, not lack of disease. It's really about how, if you have disease, you want to get rid of it, but then how do you start getting vital? And that concept of positive vitality is by getting organ reserve up. If someone is deaf, they would learn to use their vision better, right? I mean, if this is gone, then some other organ can take over, and that is called enhancing vitality of what is there. So at any point, we can always enhance vitality of our cells, we can enhance vitality of our organs. Next slide. So what functional medicine is? It's a model of discovery of all the upstream causes of what the diagnosis infers and confers upon you, right? Not just the name. It's a paradigm shift. It's a different way of thinking, which is so darn popular right now that functional medicine physicians are so hard to come by. Next slide. Craig Venter, the man shown here, wrote that book, but his is one of the 5 DNAs that went to clone the Human Genome Project. The Human Genome Project was billions of dollars, started in the late 1980s, and was completed by early 2000. And at the end of spending all these billions of dollars, the whole idea was we were going to know more about diseases. And what happened was that we knew less about diseases, and we discovered that humans really just have 21,000 genes compared to, say, an earthworm that has 100,000 genes. And so it came as a shock that you couldn't take one disease, such as, say, lupus or any other disease or diabetes, and say, hey, there's a gene association with it, and if we fix the gene, we could fix the problem. That didn't happen. Instead, what they found was that after 2000, that it was really the interaction of the environment with the genes that changed the problem, right? So there's a great variation in the number of genes. And then really, if you think about the human's ecosystem, in our gut alone, we have 100 trillion bacteria. And it's the DNA of those bacteria interacting with our 21,000 plus genes that lead to your outcome. So we are truly symbiotes, symbiotes of our bacteria, symbiotes of our own DNA that leads to a metabolic outcome. So Monsanto might be right by saying that our chemicals don't change the human frame. I mean, you don't look different when you eat genetically modified foods, but what it does do is change the bacterial composition of your gut, your skin, etc., that those genes then interacting with your genes are leading to a different outcome, right? And that's where the science is going right now, and it is absolutely exploding because the human microbiome, which is the sum of the 100 trillion bacteria, their genetics, their metabolism, interacting with our genes and our metabolism is what's leading to disease. Next slide, please. So the environmental triggers, think of it as, we call it the exposome. The exposome is the sum of everything that your body is seeing from the outside. And these could be thoughts, these could be what's hitting your skin, this could be what you eat, and it could be your stressors. So stress, lifestyle, infection, drugs, diet, pollution, keep naming them. All of those interact with your internal chemical environment, which is your genes, your leading to inflammation and persistence of disease. And these then lead to endocrine disruption, immune modulation, change in receptor binding proteins that lead to disease. So this slide will come up again because the concept of the environment modulating disease is important, because that allows me, the physician, and you, the patient, to go upstream to find the cause for your disease. Next slide, please. In functional medicine, we just ask 2 simple questions when the patient comes in, and I know it sounds like simple medicine, but it's profound. The 2 questions I ask when I'm trying to figure out what your problem is: what do you need to get rid of? Okay, do you have something that you need to get rid of? And if it is something you need to get rid of, what is it? And it really falls into very few categories: toxins, allergens, infectious agents, poor diet, stress, lack of oxygen, very, very few things. And then if it's not that, is it something that you need to thrive, right? Is it lack of love in your life, some unmet need? Is it not having proper circadian rhythms because you're a nurse doing swing shifts and can never get your cycles right? By cycles, I don't mean your period cycles, but all your metabolic cycles right? So what is required for optimal function? Next slide. So what you need to get rid of is very, very important, because that's what we're going to be focusing a lot of here. And these are toxins: biologic, elemental, synthetic toxins. Today, I think the listing of toxins is up to, I want to say 83 or 84,000 different man-made toxins that can affect us. And here's the sad truth. A baby being born, the umbilical cord blood, has shown to have at least 100 and almost 97% of the 100 common toxins already before the baby has been born. Okay, so it's so huge that we cannot just ignore it. Allergens, very, very common. Microbes, which are varied: bacteria, ticks, yeast. As global warming is happening, you can see that suddenly Lyme disease and those diseases are exploding. What we call bacteria, which are not quite bacteria, not quite viruses, things like mycoplasma, etc. These are also known to cause persisting disease. We see a lot more of those kind of diseases. Stress and SAD. SAD is an acronym for the Standard American Diet, okay, which is huge for the causation of disease. Next slide. And then what do you need to get to thrive? We talked about this. You need food, you need love, you need air. I mean, the basic 3 things that form our bodies every day, every 90 days we go through change, is food, the air we breathe, and the water we drink. And then there are more things, right? There's sunlight, there's rhythms, there's love, community, connection, there's meaning, purpose, there's movement. There are a lot of these things, and these are what we can work on in our toolbox rather than first reach out to drugs. Next slide, please. So the underlying cause of disease on this slide: toxins, allergens, microbes, nutrition, affect gene expression, which then cause the production of problematic proteins, which then undergo metabolic dysfunction, but then just cause epigenetic changes, and these then cause what we call system imbalances. And I know I've listed a lot there, but as a physician, I really think of just 5 systems to think about, and this is easy for you, the patient, to think about it. Think about assimilation. Assimilation means anything you take into your body. What is the biggest source of assimilation in your body? What we eat, right? Things that you put in. It could be the air you breathe. It could be what you apply on your skin, right? Beauty products. So that's what assimilation is. I would say about 70, 80, maybe 90% of all diseases, the problem will always include assimilation. May not always be assimilation, but include it. Your Department of Defense and Repair, which is your immune system, right? The production of energy, which is what we're going to be talking about today, the mitochondria. Biotransformation is the mechanism by which your body eliminates metabolic toxins. And communication. Communication is how all of these systems talk together by a network of hormones, neurotransmitters, and your immune system's neurotransmitters, which we call interferons and cytokines. These are all these web-like connection between these different systems that actually make or break you. Next slide. So when a patient comes to me, this is what I will use. It's called a functional medicine matrix, a little paper sheet that I'm filling in your information. So for me to summarize this, on the left side you see what we call ATMs, antecedent triggers and mediators. That means, what do you come into your problem with dermatomyositis or any situs with? Okay. Were you on heavy antibiotics? Were you exposed to mercury? What are all the problems that are there that I can find? What triggered you to develop the myositis in your particular case? Did you grow up in Coldwater Creek area and then suddenly had exposure to something or got a viral illness and then boom, you got your myositis? What was it? What was that aha moment in your life when you said, this happened, and that's when everything began? And then mediators are, well, that all happened 5 years ago. Why is it still going on today? What's keeping that process going? That's mediators. That's how I think. And knowing that, I can tell you back your story. Okay? And then in the center of the bulk of it is those 5 systems that I talked to you about. Assimilation, I'll put things in there, put things under defense and repair, energy. I list all your symptoms there and see where I populate you the most in biotransformation and communication. And at the very center of your imbalances is your mind, your emotion, your spirit. Where are you there? Is that good? The bottom is where you and I, as a team, will use as our medicine. Food as our medicine, exercise as our medicine, management of stress. Stress itself is not a bad thing. It's really very adaptive. Coming here and being stressed, being late, actually makes you, when you calm down, you're like, hey, this can be very productive. Relationships. I mean, but if you get wigged out, then your voice is quivering and you can't think, and it's like purposeless. All right, keep going. So I'm giving you this to show you an ICD-10 diagnosis of depression, okay? Diagnosis. Gnosis means what? The Latin derivative of gnosis means knowledge. So when we say depression, what is our knowledge about someone who has depression? Okay? We don't have any. What it is once we say, okay, you're helpless, hopeless, and all the 3 H's come in, and you can't get up in the morning, and you can't get to work on time, and you're dysfunctional, we got a depression. So once we call that depression, then we name it, we have blamed it, and we tame it. That's medicine for you. And I did that for years. I'm not very proud to admit it, but I did it for years. So then I would find the perfect SSRI that I was most comfortable with, that the drug rep dropped off at the door, that I can use on you and tame it, right? And if that didn't work, it didn't work. But today, I can see that some patients with depression have gluten sensitivities or grain sensitivities. Some people have dysbiosis because of years of using gastrointestinal medicines. Some people might have vitamin D3 deficiency. Some might have omega-3 deficiency. Some might have the standard American diet as their nutritional deficiencies. And some might have polypharmacy as the cause for their depression, right? So many, many causes, one diagnosis. These same things could also be causing your conditions, right? It's not very different. So what I'm saying to you is there are many ways, upstream ways, to get to multiple diseases, and instead what we're doing is getting caught up in the name. All right, so we'll move on from here into mitochondriopathies, if you'll go to the next slide. So chronic disease then results from the emergence of a disturbed metabolism. And that disturbed metabolism is because of what you've been exposed to that changes your internal milieu. When you change your internal milieu, it leads to problems. If it happens to be you have the right genetic association, you got put on a statin drug, and then your muscles got damaged, and that's what triggered your myopathy, that's what happened, right? So we can postulate many mechanisms. You may never perfectly know, but that's how we start to think about it. Next slide. So what I'm trying to tell you is We need to stop mopping the floor and first shut off the leaky faucet or repair the leaky faucet, right? But that's not what we do in medicine. We keep mopping the floor. We are downstream in our causes of disease, in our understanding of diseases, and treat the end mechanism instead of the cause, right? So this is what we need to learn not to do. All right. So now we'll move on to the mitochondriopathy. So we're now going to take functional medicine, you know a little bit about it, and apply it to the myositis. So show me the next beautiful blue slide. Oh, before that, the functional matrix, energy is where we're going to be going to. That's where mitochondria lie. And in any of the myositis, you will know, and if you don't know, you should know it. The biggest problem is that a little organelle in the cell called the mitochondria is begun to get dysfunctional. Okay, so that's where the problem is. And then it marries itself with something in your Department of Defense, and that would cause an autoimmune myopathy, or it could be something with digestion, or it could be multiple things. But those are the two areas, the brown and the peach, that I'm going to be focusing on in today's talk. Next slide. So now here comes the beautiful blue slide. Anybody know what this is? These are the mitochondria. Okay, beautiful, beautiful organelles. So an organelle is something that's in the cell. Okay, your organ is, the cells are made up, many cells go together to make tissue, and the tissue makes the organ, right? So it's called an organelle. It's called a mitochondria. So I'll tell you a story about the mitochondria. The mitochondria are your powerhouses. They make energy. I like to think of the cell as the United States of America, right? Every part of the cell, the little organelles that make up a cell, are the different states, the 50 states, just to give you a simple metaphor. The mitochondria is like the state of Texas. Texas has oil reserves, gold reserves, natural gas, and so it thinks, hey, I'm very important. And so it doesn't like to depend on the federal government, the nucleus of the cell. It takes charge of its own DNA, and that little mitochondria has its own DNA that runs your energy apparatus. And you know who that DNA comes from? 98% your mother. It's called the mitochondrial DNA, so if you have a good maternal gene, there's a good chance that you can be pretty darn healthy, okay? And the mitochondrial gene, by the way, is also what's used in DNA testing to know your roots, where you came from, and how you link ultimately to which part of the world, and trace your lineage from the original human being. Next slide. That's an anatomical description of the mitochondria. It has an outer membrane and inner membrane, and then the inner membrane is folded into these little folds called cristae, and nutrients have to cross from the outer membrane into the inner membrane. That inner membrane is really, really important because that's where a lot of the stuff is happening that we need. Food that comes in, fats undergo something called beta oxidation there, and with multiple enzymes, and glucose, for example, will undergo something called glycolysis in the Krebs cycle or the tricyclic acid cycle to make hydrogen. The whole idea of food, fats or carbohydrates, is to make hydrogen ions. Why hydrogen? Because if you can make hydrogen, you can start to create a motor or a pump or a gradient. Hydrogen is positively charged, and as you keep on accumulating hydrogen ions in the mitochondria, so you will start to create low hydrogen to high hydrogen, and there's no place for this hydrogen to go except through an enzyme called ATP synthetase, which takes oxygen that you breathe, which takes ADP, a molecule, and the hydrogen, and boom, it goes through the motor, and out comes ATP, and then you're spewing out heat, water, and energy. That's the beautiful pump that we have. That's the mitochondria, right? In the center of the mitochondria, you can see the DNA sitting there, just kind of lying in this loose factory, kind of loose. It's not folded and protected and coiled where it can be protected from all the free radicals from the heat and the water. So it's very susceptible to destruction. So it's really important for us to not just provide our body with calories, but also to provide with the calories the color that is required to protect the mitochondria. And the color from food are your antioxidants. Next slide. Functions of the mitochondria, predominantly the making of energy. That is its most predominant function. It's also required for the by synthesis of proteins, but also to synthesize its own self. It can send signals to actually grow if demand is needed and to branch out and multiply. It's not just these little cute little oval egg-like things, but it can also form branches, and we've seen that now. And it's also used to signal. It can signal the immune system. If mitochondria get damaged, if the inner membrane gets damaged, the inner membrane is made of a fat called anticardiolipin. Some of you in this room might know what anticardiolipin syndrome is. You excrete this, you make waste of anticardiolipin, your immune system recognizes it as a foreign particle and attacks it, and you form antibodies. And that's associated with lupus-like conditions. It can also just simply undergo cell death, and the mitochondrial fragments are recognized by your immune system, and it triggers your immune system through something called toll receptors. So it's really, those are the major functions of the mitochondria. Let's go to bioenergetics. In this case, I'm showing you muscle. Let me get some water. The way it makes energy is it takes food. Proteins are usually not used to make energy, but it can do so by creating ketone bodies. Polysaccharides are basically carbohydrates, and fats are fats. So fats and carbohydrates go in to make acetyl-CoA, and that's happening. Those cross the membrane of the mitochondria, and through glycolysis or beta oxidation, it goes through the citric acid cycle in the inner membrane. And in the membrane, you release hydrogen ions, which then through something called the electron transport change, that pump that I was talking about, you'll start creating the hydrogen gradient and finally make ATP. All right, next slide. So today we know that disorders of mitochondrial structure, the whole actual anatomical physiological structure, as well as dysfunctions in the mechanism or the function of the mitochondria without change in structure are one of the main causes or mechanisms of disease. And this is seen in autoimmunity. We see it in congestive heart failure and a failing heart. They have severe mitochondriopathy. It's seen in type 2 diabetes, cancers. Name the disease and it's linked with mitochondriopathy. Alzheimer's disease is one such mitochondriopathy. And if you all know the major thought process in Alzheimer's disease, that is, it's related to these amyloid proteins or tau proteins that get deposited in your brain. But all the drugs, the 4 major drugs that have been released, do not work on these. And so there was one physician who actually wrote a bestseller book a couple of years ago that said, look, that's just really a marker of your body's response to something that you form these amyloid proteins. And believe it or not, just last month, if any of you are in business and read Fortune magazine from just last month, February 2019, had this amazing story of an ethnobotanist who has been doing his discovery and found that he can actually reverse Alzheimer's by a simple amino acid replacement. And the reason for the amino acid working is because there's a particular toxin that damages neurons, which lead to the formation of amyloid. It didn't take physicians. It took a PhD ethnobotanist and a team of bat scientists and to discover this. And it's made it to Fortune magazine because everybody wants a way to figure out how to make money from this. So again, most diseases are triggered by changes in the cellular milieu. The mitochondria damage is no exception to that rule. Oxidative stress from what it's doing by making energy, inflammation, toxin exposure, antibiotic exposure, all of these cause, and nutritional deficiencies cause the problem. Next slide. So that's nice, healthy looking under an electron microscope mitochondria, and that's when disease begins to set in and the mitochondria get frayed, the crista get frayed. Next slide. All right, what are the sources of mitochondrial dysfunction? You already kind of know it, but I'm going to start listing it here. Oxidative stress means as it's making energy, it's releasing these free oxygen radicals, etc., that need damage control. Kind of like your car. If you keep driving your car, you need to kind of take it to the mechanic to kind of get it serviced and keep it regularly serviced, right? Your mitochondria too needs regular servicing. Environmental toxicities, caloric overload is huge, and this is going to be a big focus of how we repair. Gluco and lipotoxicity, that means if you start to put on weight in the middle, insulin resistance is such a marker of inflammation and causes so much mitochondrial dysfunction that by itself it can cause a mitochondriopathy without having any genetic associations. Micronutrient deficiencies, chronic infections, inflammation, the same. You'll see that the causes are pretty much the same as what you need to get rid of in order to get rid of disease. Next slide. When you get oxidative stress, what you're doing is you're damaging fats, you're damaging sugars and proteins, you're damaging DNA, and basically you're changing the structure of your tissue and your cells and your organelles. Next slide. All right, how does caloric excess do this? Caloric excess, fructose, and alcohol, we know actually kind of begin to impair the whole oxidative. It uncouples oxidative phosphorylation, which in simple words just means the mitochondria's function doesn't work. It doesn't change the structure of the mitochondria, but it so overwhelms the process that now you begin to take sugar and fat and put it into your liver as opposed to actually make energy from it. Next slide. Mitochondrial biogenesis. Biogenesis means to grow yourself, right? So in this case, we're talking about how mitochondria can become larger or increase their numbers. And, one slide back. And there's a protein called PGC1 alpha. The P stands for PPAR. PPAR is peroxisome proliferator activator receptor. In simple language, what it means is it's a protein that goes and binds to your DNA and opens up certain genes. So PGC1 alpha is a protein that binds onto PPAR, and when it binds onto PPAR, it actually begins, it's a master regulator of saying, you need to make more mitochondria. So what are the signals that can increase PGC1 alpha? Exercise, fasting and starvation, and cold exposure. Okay? It's also activated by appropriate thyroid hormone, not just giving someone thyroid hormone, and another hormone called adiponectin. Adiponectin is often seen in belly fat, and when it goes low in insulin resistance, it actually decreases insulin sensitivity. Its function is to improve insulin sensitivity. All right. Okay, let's cover a few toxins really quickly. Cigarette smoke has both cyanide and carbon monoxide, but these can also happen independently of cigarette smoke. And it's a huge, it was discovered as the #1 mitochondrial toxin. It blocks actually the production of heme. So it displaces oxygen, okay? So next slide. Of about 10 slides of environmental chemicals from a functional medicine database, I just picked this one because these are common. You've heard of bisphenol A. So it inhibits complex 2. The electron transport chain has 4 complexes, complex 1, 2, 3, 4. It inhibits complex 2. Atrazine, which is a chemical that's used for pest control in our foods, inhibits complex 1 and 2. That means that's where CoQ10 works. Organophosphates affects neurotoxins. Keep going to the next slide. Multiple pharmaceuticals. Tylenol, acetaminophen, prevents fats from being made into energy. Gentamicin and those antibiotics poison the mitochondria. So do multiple drugs. Statins block an enzyme called HMG-CoA, which make cholesterol, but that same enzyme also makes CoQ10. What did I tell you CoQ10 does? It is responsible for the electron transport chain complex 1 and 2. It acts as a wheelbarrow. It actually transfers hydrogen ions down the chain. So if you don't have CoQ10, you can't increase that hydrogen gradient. If you can't increase the hydrogen gradient, you cannot make energy. As simple as that. That's why when you use a statin drug, always use CoQ10. Statin drug is also often a reason why someone who has a predisposition to myopathy can now develop full-blown myopathy. And they can actually develop antibodies to HMG-CoA. Next slide. And that's a different myositis from dermatomyositis. Mitochondrial toxins. Multiple cancer chemotherapy works because it's a mitochondrial toxin. We want it. It's oxidative in its effects. So that's how it kills cancer cells. But unfortunately, it doesn't pick cancer cells alone. It also kills normal cells, and that's the problem. Metformin, still the gold standard drug for type 2 diabetes, is also a mitochondrial toxin. Type 2 diabetes, I already showed you, is a mitochondrial problem, but we use a mitochondrial poison to treat it. Interestingly enough, metformin is at very low doses helps PGC1 alpha. So it can actually make your mitochondrial grow. So Life Extension and many of these anti-aging foundations will put people on low-dose metformin to actually help them. Tamoxifen inhibits that end part of the collection of hydrogen ions in the electron transport chain within the mitochondria, and so it can actually deplete energy. Valproic acid is used in bipolar disease and seizure disorders. Inhibits the very last. It inhibits an enzyme called ATP synthetase, which traps and makes energy, ATP. Next slide. Metals. Metals are huge as upstream causes for a lot of the myopathies. I've seen many patients with dermatomyositis with both lead and mercury, as well as PCB exposure. Mercury and lead is huge in those particular toxicities. And often it's the only one that we can test. Most other toxins are very hard to test, and so we don't bother wasting our money. Next slide. So the concept of POPs, persistent organic pollutants, we know today is one of the biggest causes of diabetes when you cannot lose weight. So if there's a clinical pearl I can give you about toxins, toxins are stored in your body in fat. If you're skinny, you can't store toxins very well. Okay, so toxins are always stored in fat, and it comes to your food, comes into your body through fat. It can be absorbed as, say, organochlorides, but you need fat to absorb it. So if you can get rid of some of the fat, you can get rid of persistent organic pollutants, but the irony is you can't break that fat down because it's resistant to being broken down. It's not like bare fat or brown fat that you can break down. And so it's a double whammy. You can't break the fat down, but it's also causing the problem. So we know that mitochondrial DNA abnormalities from these persistent organic pollutants is what is leading to type 2 diabetes, or one of the mechanisms of type 2 diabetes. Next slide. Multiple micronutrient deficiencies in the standard American diet can also prevent certain enzymes from working. So when we target nutrition for mitochondria, we need to know what it is we are doing. Are we treating an enzyme in the mitochondria? Are we treating the mitochondrial membrane? Are we treating repair of the DNA? Are we treating the lack of antioxidant function because some genes are off. We need to know what is off before we start to treat. Next slide. All right, I'm going to now segue away from mitochondrial dysfunction to that second segment on the functional matrix, which is autoimmunity, inflammation, your Department of Defense. So what is autoimmunity? Or what causes autoimmunity? Autoimmunity simply means your immune system is attacking itself. The hallmark of the immune system is to defend you from an invader. But it's also got to know self and be tolerant to self. If it cannot be tolerant to self and somehow recognize parts of you, then it's going to attack you, and that's autoimmunity. So autoimmunity is, in 2009, Alessio Fasano, a gastroenterologist from now Harvard Medical School, discovered a cause for autoimmunity, and he called it the autoimmune triad. And he used the case of celiac disease and said, okay, if you have a genetic predisposition, in the case of celiac, 2 genes called HLA-DQ2 and 8, and you got exposed to gluten and something else happened, and the third part of the triad is you had a permeable barrier, you now develop full-blown autoimmunity if the trigger never got away. In other words, you continuously kept eating gluten and you had the gene. So, and this was published in Scientific American in 2009 and pretty much hit the waves. And I remember reading about it, and none of my rheumatology colleagues had even heard about it. And in 2017, when he gave us another talk, he added a 4th component to the triad and now called it a quadrad, which is a microbiome. So let's go through them one by one. Genetics. In autoimmunity or any of your myopathies, there's not a single genetic identifier that we know causes the myopathy. I've had patients go look for genetic mutations, and it's always come up with no results other than, oh, I've identified 1, 2, or 3 genes, but what do we do with this information? We don't know, right? So we don't know because it's not just the gene. It's something that's acting on the gene that's causing the problem. So, and that something acting on the gene is called epigenetic modulation. And further, I told you about the interaction of our bacterial genes with the genes. So there are multiple genetics involved in autoimmunity. It's not as simple. So this is not where you want to spend your time and your effort. Next slide. This is where you want to spend your time. What are the triggers? The triggers are usually the environment. And this is most commonly food. It could be pollution. It could be stress. It could be the multiple drugs that you want. It could have been radiation that you had for a cancer 15 years ago. So I need to know that in order to help you. Not that it says, oh, well, I can say to you, well, you've had radiation, end of chapter, everything closed. Now you can't change anything. You know, you can. But you need to know what happened to your DNA from radiation. If I know that, then I can begin to help you. Because remember the slide? I'm bringing back the slide because this is what causes the internal disruption. Next slide. And then the third part of the triad was an impaired barrier. So this is showing you the lining of your cell. Believe it or not, from your mouth to your anus, your entire digestive tract is basically covered with a lining which is 1 cell thick. Okay? And it's pretty tightly connected together, as opposed to in this slide where there are cracks between cells. They should not be. It should be glued fairly close together through bonds. And so when the villi get damaged and the cell junctions get damaged, it's called a leaky gut. You can get a leaky skin when you get eczema and dermatitis. And to some extent, we all have some kind of leakiness. But when it gets excessive, then on that side, on top of that is your inner part of the gut. On this side is where your blood and your immune system is. Your immune system begins to see things it's not supposed to see and launches an immune attack. Next slide. So remember I told you the quadrad is the microbiome, is your 100 trillion bacteria in your gut. So host genetics, maintain it. Your lifestyle, maintain it. if you were born by natural vaginal childbirth with C-section, that determines what your gut bacteria is going to be. Medical practices such as the use of vaccines, the use of excessive antibiotics, and excessive hygiene can also affect the gut bacteria, right? And so when all of these are present in a negative way, it leads to dysbiosis. Bios, life, disharmony, so of the 100 trillion bacteria, and that can then lead to disease. So how it leads to disease is it triggers your immune system in a negative way to either make Th1 cells associated with cellular immunity like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease. Th2 cells lead to things like asthma, allergies, and Th17, those are the bad boys of autoimmunity and chronic persistent inflammation, for which we use drugs like TNF-alpha, for which we use drugs like Stelara, etc. But if you're able to combat it and maintain health, then we maintain the peacekeeper cells called Treg cells. Treg cells in our gut and everywhere in our body help us differentiate into this when we want to, but abort the acute inflammation response and go back to becoming peacekeeper cells. Next slide. So what causes autoimmunity? Combination of genetics and environmental triggers talking to our genes, changing our internal milieu with the association of leaky barriers and gut microflora. And if all of these stay persistent, it leads to autoimmunity. So next slide. Now coming to the myopathies. What is myositis? Myositis is autoimmunity along with mitochondrial dysfunction. Okay? So you see how I've been taking you down this loop. You learned about mitochondrial dysfunction, you learned about autoimmunity, and the combination of the two in the muscles particularly, especially in the mitochondria, lead to your myositis. Next slide. So when I talk about diagnosis here, I'm not talking about naming your disease such as dermatomyositis or polymyositis or inclusion body myositis. No, that's not what I'm doing here. I'm looking and saying once you have that diagnosis by muscle biopsy or through antibody testing, what can we do to go look at those upstream causes? That's the diagnosis that this slide is all about. So here, working with a functional medicine practitioner, you can target your specific antibodies. You can start testing for those leaky barriers in autoimmunity. You can start testing for multiple infections. You can start testing for your gut microflora to see if there's enough diversity. We should have 100% diversity. But people eating the standard American diet, the average diversity of these gut bacteria, that means the more diverse it is, the better it is roughly about 20 to 30% as opposed to being closer to 100%. We can start checking for toxins. We can check for insulin resistance and inflammation. We can check for nutritional deficiencies. And I should have added two very important ones here that I use. One is called organic acid testing. Organic acid testing is really a urine test that is actually testing for mitochondrial waste products. So it's like I'm looking at your trash can, if you will, and looking to see what you ate. And so I'm going upstream to go and find out what's been happening. Another very exciting, and I haven't done this test yet, but I just began to hear about it, is called the Mitoswab. And the Mitoswab is now going to start telling me what the problem is in your electron transport chain. So it's very, we're at a very exciting time in terms of starting to begin to get upstream causes so that this is no longer just holistic or grandma medicine. This is really a medicine of science. Next slide. So now, take a moment here to just reconnect and say, okay, we're talking about myositis, we're talking about autoimmunity, we're talking about mitochondrial dysfunction, and we're talking about how do we look upstream from the diagnosis name to find the cause and how do we treat it. So now we're going to start looking at possible treatment options in addition to whatever you're doing conventionally. So again, I'm not anti-doing anything conventionally, but to do it and not to correct upstream problems is asking for trouble because you're going to be constantly linked to the doctor. The idea of an acute inflammation is you treat it, hopefully a few years, get rid of it, because you've done everything to repair your milieu. Okay? And that's what we're looking at today. Next slide. All right. So 3 major things: pharmacological intervention, exercise, caloric restriction. So pharmacological intervention can be conventional medical drugs, but in my case, I'm not going to be talking about conventional medical drugs. I'm going to be talking about nutrients that we can use to treat different parts of mitochondrial function. This will then start to improve mitochondrial function as well as start to improve mitochondrial biogenesis. It increases insulin sensitivity, and you normalize your metabolism and mitochondrial function. It's simple as that. That slide tells you everything that we're going to be learning about. Next slide. Always, always start with food. It's the best and the most common thing that we all do. And food should be your primary medicine, not a supplement. A supplement is not food. Food should be your medicine, and then you add to it what supplement you may need for a short period of time. So look at the food color chart here. I don't know how many people of you have a diet like this. More than 50% of your rectangle is plant-based foods. Okay? If you continue to go on, it's more than 75% is plant-based foods. Herbs, fruits, and you don't have to restrict it to just low glycemic fruits like raspberries and berries. If you're not overweight, you can certainly put in fruits which are seasonal. But I tell my patients the ratio to fruit to vegetables, 3 vegetable servings to 1 fruit, right? So most people say, oh, I love fruit. I can eat 8 fruit a day. But that doesn't give you enough of your vegetables. It's that green category and the colors in the greens, putting in all the sulfur compounds if you have autoimmunity from broccoli, kale, which you cannot eat if you have very, very severe leaky barrier, so then you have to repair your leaky barrier. And then for those of you who do eat meat, fish is supposed to be a better one, but it has to be wild. Again, just 2 months ago, major study published showing that consumption of fish was associated with type 2 diabetes. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, okay? So again, why is that? It's because we've so polluted our environment that if we eat upstream, or the higher the species of the animal we eat, beef being the worst, the worse we're going to get, right? So you're better off eating plant foods, even if it's not all organic. The question is, you have to have variety. It can't be potatoes and corn. It really has to include this whole variety. I'm a vegetarian by design, not because I don't like steak and chicken, but by design because I see people dying of cancer. My father had stroke, and I made the decision in 2007 that I wasn't going to touch meat. And last year I went completely vegan. Love it. I feel so energetic and don't actually miss the stuff, right? So if I missed it, I would go eat it. I don't find that I have to cheat very often. But this is where I get my food protein from. I also get it, a cup of broccoli, most people do not know this, gives you complete protein at 6 grams, you know? And you don't need, we over talk about proteins. We don't need that much proteins to survive. Next slide. To actually be well, not just to survive. Remember I talked about caloric restriction? The more you eat, the more you need to make energy. If you can't make energy, you're going to put that fat in the liver as fat. If the liver makes fat, then you're going to cloud your cells so that it doesn't function very well and causes insulin resistance. So eating less or going through fasting programs, I'm ending my 5-day fast kind of, it's not really a fast, but a kind of a spring detox, if you will, today. And it's just you eat much less, okay? And when you eat much less, it's a trigger to get PGC1 alpha and increase mitochondrial biogenesis. That means I'm going to be making more mitochondria. Pair that with exercise, I'm going to increase my mitochondrial numbers. Okay. At Palm, we also use something called Prolon. Palm is where I work, sorry. Prolon is a 5-day fasting program that I often convince my patients to do at least 2-3 times a year if they don't know how to fast themselves and eat well. I don't recommend just water fasting. It can be quite dangerous if you have health problems. If you've been doing it for religious purposes all your life and doing okay, I don't have a problem. But if you're toxic, then you have to be careful. Next slide. Let's go through some nutrients. There's such an exhaustive list of nutrients that I'll be happy to answer some questions at any time. But I'm going to go through just some of them that I think are important, and I'm sure I'll forget some of them. But here's the set. Remember I told you when you use nutrients for the mitochondria, you need to know what it is you're doing. These are nutrients to help free oxygen radicals. So these help repair the damage to the DNA. And these are berberine. Berberine is also used to help with insulin resistance. Berberine is used as an antimicrobial. Curcumin. Curcumin is derivative. It's derived from turmeric. So it's an anti-inflammatory, but also is responsible for the PGC1 alpha by decreasing inflammation. Sulforaphane is derived from broccoli sprouts. Sulforaphane is powerful. It's very highly concentrated in watercress, more so than broccoli. Yet everybody talks about broccoli, but all of them are important. The more variety you have, the better off you are. Because it could be that you, Linda, might need broccoli, but I need chives as my sulfur source, and someone else needs something else. Or we need much more of multiple things, right? So you just want to keep it varied. Quercetin is derived from onions. It's the yellowish compound, doesn't smell like onions, but it's an amazing, amazing supplement, and I use it for people with hives. I use it for mitochondrial dysfunction. I use it for histamine because it can really stabilize the release of histamine. Resveratrol is made from grape skins. Resveratrol was associated with anti-aging, but resveratrol is an amazing compound along with pterostilbene, which is really like a resveratrol, to begin to repair DNA. Green tea polyphenols, it has so many things, I can't even begin. It's like turmeric. Green tea polyphenols and curcumin is used from cancer to autoimmunity. Next slide. Now this is used for mitochondrial function. So for the oxidative phosphorylation cycle and also for the electron transport chain. Acetyl-L-carnitine is a tripeptide. What it does is it transfers fats across the mitochondrial membrane, the outer membrane. So it's taking it in to make energy. I think I know I happen to have a genetic predisposition, and I'm a vegan. Carnitine, it's heavily present in meat. So for myself, I need to use 500 milligrams of carnitine fairly regularly to keep my levels up. Alpha-lipoic acid is a sulfur-containing compound, helps with free oxygen radicals. Coenzyme Q10, I already told you, it's part of electron transport chain 1 and 2. Its job is also a transporter. It's a wheelbarrow, taking hydrogen ions down that chain to accumulate that gradient. Magnesium, multiple cofactor for multiple enzymes in the oxidative phosphorylation. That means how glucose becomes ATP. Creatine is a substance that can actually also enhance that process through amino acids. Melatonin repairs DNA. It's the only known hormone that we know that can repair DNA. So I'll often use melatonin when my patients go through radiation therapy because radiation will damage DNA. Nicotinamide riboside is a form of niacin, but it is not niacin. It doesn't cause flushing. And what it does, it was studied at Mayo Clinic for when football players started to have concussion injuries. At 1,000 milligrams a day, along with resveratrol, is very, very effective in helping repair the brain from concussion. And concussion is basically trauma and mitochondrial injury. Branched-chain amino acids, we're going to learn about it in the next slide, if you'll get to the next slide. Branched-chain amino acids, do you all know what that is? You hear bodybuilders use it. It's part of essential amino acids. Amino acids are breakdown of protein. So if you think of a protein as being a big chain, a bead of many beads strung together to make a chain. An amino acid is one bead. There are 9 amino acids that are essential, and essential means that you have to get it to your diet. You cannot manufacture it. Branched chain amino acids are 3 of those 9. They're responsible, and I bring this one up for this talk because it's very responsible to repair muscle. And you don't give it early in the course of the disease, but as recovery happens is when you throw in branched chain amino acids. And what it does is it increases the number of mitochondria, it decreases oxidative stress, it turns on multiple genes that can actually turn off inflammation and help build muscle protein. It acts very similar to caloric restriction, so it's working through PGC1 alpha. Next slide. Exercise. Oh my gosh, I cannot tell you enough about this. Just 4 months of exercise could increase your biogenesis, the amount of mitochondria that you make, even if you're skinny. You don't have to be a bulky man or woman to have mitochondria. Exercise also increases that inner mitochondrial membrane called cardiolipin, and that cardiolipin is very important for the making of your energy. It increases mitochondrial enzymes, and by itself can decrease A1C even before your glucose goes down, okay? Or before your weight goes down. So I'll see my patients who are diabetic saying, look, my A1C is 5.3, doctor, I'm not really diabetic, right? But they have all the insulin resistance signs yet. So they're going in the right direction. I just have to keep encouraging them to stay on that pathway to get the fat off, because I need to get the fat and the toxins off to turn off the need for any drug that they need. Next slide. We talked about cold. If you remember, cold can actually help with PGC1 alpha as well and mitochondrial biogenesis. And there are many ways that cold can do it, but basically it works through a DNA level and also decreasing inflammation. If you can immerse yourself and dive into a pool, turn on your shower on cold for about 30 seconds every morning, that cold shock is really, really important to help you kind of recuperate on a daily basis. At Palm, where I work, we actually have a cryo machine, and we put people into minus 120 degrees for 1 to 3 minutes. It's quite energizing, and you don't feel it that same day. It really is 3 minutes, but it's the longest 3 minutes of your life. It feels so wonderful. I tend to be very cold, so I have to keep, I keep hopping around in the little machine and then quickly jump out and jump into the sauna. And it takes about 5 minutes to warm up, but what it's doing is beginning to help you create stem cells and also repair your DNA. Next slide. So here are all the benefits if you can enhance mitochondrial function. The very causes of the dysfunction go away. So you decrease oxidative stress, you increase your metabolic function, you get more energy, that means. You increase exercise performance. I have so many patients coming and telling me when they start to exercise, they get short of breath, or they climb hills and they get short of breath. And I do pulmonary function testing, cardiac testing, can't find it. It's a subtle mitochondriopathy, and as you help them exercise and help their mitochondria, they get better. It'll help you decrease body fat and increase lean muscle mass. It decreases the aging-related entropy, which happens, and it ultimately increases lifespan. So I'm not really interested in increasing lifespan. I'm interested in increasing health span. That means if your lifespan and your health span are the same, you can go to your grave healthy. Okay? And then finally, it helps with cancer suppression. So some clinical pearls before I end. And this is not just for myositis, because not everybody in this room has myositis, but since the mitochondria is required for energy, and energy is required by every cell in the body, it has to be one of those upstream mechanisms for when it undergoes dysfunction to cause disease. So here are simple things you can do without even thinking about myositis. Eat calorie appropriate, phytonutrient dense. What does that mean? Okay, here's a weighing scale. On this side of the weighing scale is a burger and French fries. Let's say it weighs, what, quarter pounder, let's say it's a half pounder with the French fries. And then on this side of the scale, I want you to eat half pounds of vegetables and lentils. How much do you think you have to eat to get the same calories here on this side of the scale? I can't eat it. Okay? So here, I'm very phytonutrient dense because the calories I get here have everything needed to repair itself. Here, I have the calories, I can make energy, feel good, but I cannot repair myself. Can you see the difference? Okay? That's what's meant by a phytonutrient dense. And if you naturally keep your calories, don't go for low-calorie foods ever. Look for foods that are naturally low in calories. Okay? I eat avocados. Those are high in calories. But I'm going to pair that with a huge salad, right? Or I'm going to pair it with salad and lentils or black bean burger. So find a way to eat your calories with lots of fiber, and you'll be fine. Eat colorfully. The color in food doesn't really give you ATP, but it helps repair the processes that are involved when ATP is made, the destructive processes when ATP is made. So again, like your car, when your car is running, it gets you from place A to B, but if you keep driving, you need to take it to the mechanic. So colorful foods is your daily mechanic. Avoid toxins. You can't avoid them all. We live in a toxic world. You can't go overboard, but what you can bring into control, you can bring into control. So the most common for women is beauty products. Do you know how many beauty products? Your skin is a source of assimilation of these products. Consider and look for products that are clean. Try not to use lawn chemicals. It's a constant battle I have to have with my husband. Do we want these carpenter ants here, or do we want to kill it, and what do we do? So, find a little balance there. And there are lots of companies, like for our carpenter ants, we have a company that actually comes and does it naturally. And if it doesn't work, then they'll use the chemicals. Consider caloric restriction or intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting really became this kind of catch-all phrase, but really the word breakfast, is you're not eating after dinner for at least about 12 hours and breaking fast, right? So that's intermittent fasting. We really should, as human beings, have about 10 to 12 hours naturally every day that you don't eat. But that means there's no snacking with your evening TV. Once you eat dinner, no more food. So I usually try and get done by about 7 o'clock and don't eat till about 7 o'clock next morning. And then challenge your brain and body with multiple, not just cognitive exercises, but physical exercises, because the mitochondria are present in the brain, they're present in the muscle, and we need to challenge constantly for neuroplasticity, okay? For neuroplasticity for the brain, for physical plasticity for the body. All right, with that, I'm going to end my talk and then open it up for questions. I think I don't have any more slides, just double check. Yeah.
You hold on to that.
Okay.
I'm going to pass this around.
Why did I go close to them and repeat that question instead?
Oh, we could do that.
Yep.
Okay, that'd be great.
Anybody with questions? Thanks. Bye, Vicky. Yes.
So could you give us a picture of if someone with myositis would come to you, they get a diagnosis, they come to you, you do all the study of the upstream, how long does it take, does insurance cover it? Give us a picture.
Colleen's question is, if someone came to me to treat myositis and that it was diagnosed and I did all the upstream diagnosis, does insurance cover it, and how long does it take to recover and heal? Good question. First, insurance doesn't cover a lot of the upstream causes. I can check some of them through Quest and LabCorp, but not all of the functional medicine, like organic acids, are not covered. In some insurances cover it, but I can never pick which one will and when they choose to cover it. Some cover at 60%, some don't cover. To see me, I am in insurance, but we are a concierge model, so it's a membership fee to join. There are other functional medicine physicians. Prior to joining Palm, I was a cash-only basis because insurance really doesn't cover half the things I do. And then I still often work with other rheumatologists who might make that initial diagnosis, and then patients come to me. How long does it take? It really varies on how much the patient is able to do. So most patients, like if you have myopathy, your muscles are so weak, or if you're heavy, you have so much work to do that it might take you 5-10 years, right? I mean, if you just can't work hard enough. But if you feel like really motivated and you're going to go, you could do this in 2 years. So there's no way I can say that. It's really the team's motivation, both the physician and the patient. So I feel really bad when my patients cannot make the change, or I can't really help them make the change, because it does require a combination of willpower and assertiveness that I'm going to do this, and that I can, and that I have the tools to.
How long does your study take to know what to suggest?
Study?
Well, when you're studying their life system.
That's the first or second office visit.
Okay.
Yeah. She said the question was, how long does it take for me to analyze what's happening here? And I said about one of the first 2 office visits, I want to know everything. Like, can you really tell me everything about your life in the first visit? Not really. You might come back after the 4th visit and say, I forgot to tell you, dang it, I lived by Coldwater Creek. I played in the runoff. I mean, I'm like, I didn't know about this before. So that might be ongoing. But I would say 75-80% we can get in the first 2 to 3 visits. Other questions? Yes?
On fasting, you say you fast, how often do you fast?
And how does it work? I mean, do you just drink water, or do you how do you manage it, and how often?
I'm assuming you're not talking about me, but you're talking about the general.
Well, I'm talking about if you were recommending fasting for me, what would your recommendation be?
Do you have myositis?
I do.
Okay. So first, if you're early in the course of your disease, I wouldn't go with fasting, okay? Because fasting will remove toxins. And if you are inflamed, when you release toxins, you're going to get into worse trouble, right? So I wouldn't start with fasting there. But let's say you're making progress. You went on a drug, and you started to work on upstream mechanisms, and you kind of plateaued, right? And I have right now a lupus patient who just, certain things she just can't do, like diet, she just can't do it. So she went on a 21-day water and juice fast, and she couldn't do it at home because she had 3 kids. So she went to a center in California, and I talked to the physician there, did all the work, and she wasn't able to do 21 days, but she did 2 weeks. And amazing, CRP starting off 80. CRP is a marker for inflammation. At the end of the 2 weeks fast, it's down to 20. Her complement proteins, which had never been normal for lupus, 2 out of 3 normalized. So multiple parameters start to normalize. Should everybody fast? So fasting, water fasting alone can be problematic. If you're able to do it, and you do it for, like most people do it for religious reasons, 1 to 3 days, I wouldn't exceed 3 days, because your body does need some level of protein to maintain a certain status quo. So I use programs, which one of them is Prolon if you need a box, but I do mine, like I'm coming out of one which is not really a box. All I ate was a couple of starchy vegetables, and those starchy vegetables are cassava, taro, and sweet potato. So any of those I could have, and that would be my breakfast. Throughout the day, I could eat any deep yellow orange vegetables. So again, you could have more sweet potato, but it's boring by now. So it would be butternut squash, zucchini squash, orange squash, acorn squash, any of those. But they all have to be steamed and cooked. I could eat fruit, which is seasonal, which this time of the year is pears, apples, but they have to be poached and cooked, right? And nothing else can be added. You can add asparagus, celery. What else can you add? Chard and spinach, but they have to be cooked. All the good vegetables like broccoli, etc., are gone during this time, right? So you're getting some level of protein coming from your vegetables, and you can only use salt. So no herbs, spices, none of it, and plenty of water.
Why couldn't you do intermittent fasting? Like eat a meal as opposed to 3 meals a day, 1 meal skipped every few times a week. Would that be beneficial?
Linda's question is, why couldn't you do intermittent fasting instead of doing 3 meals a day? Just do 1 meal a day, say 3 times a week. And you can, but it's the question is, what is the purpose? Is your purpose for fasting to lose weight? Is your purpose to repair? And so I do the fasting that I do, which is roughly about 700 to 800 calories a day. I do it for stem cell regeneration and to naturally keep inflammation low, and also to always heal the gut, because constantly what we put into our gut is what's going to be killing us, right? They say death begins in the colon. So it's the purpose of the fast, right? So intermittent fasting should actually be a norm for every human being every day for at least 10 hours. For at least 10 hours, your system should not get food. Okay, it's really, really critical. If you're hypoglycemic, you can have a small snack, but really the cause for hypoglycemia has its roots in some of these things here, especially stress and mitochondrial dysfunction. So fix that. Yes?
Is there a certain place that you suggest to purchase supplements?
Is there a certain place I suggest to purchase supplements? So supplements are, there's lots of stuff out there. Everybody and their grandpa wants to start getting into the supplement business. Then there's multi-level marketing. Yes, there are good places and bad places. I can't list all of them. But usually it's to find big companies that have good manufacturing practices. You want to quiz them and know that their extraction method for supplements didn't use benzenes, hexanes, which is often what, say, China uses to extract, say, things like ginkgo and green tea, because it's cheaper than to use water extraction, where the quantity is much less. And how is a patient to know it? Actually, how is a physician to know it? And we do it through trade groups and through groups, and these are people who go to our physician meetings, etc. And so that's how we learn about it. And so it's a really dog-eat-dog industry out there. You really have to be careful. My one word of advice is don't buy it at Walgreens and CVS. There are very few supplements that you can buy there. One of them I do send people to is certain probiotics, one called Culturel and one called Align. They're freely available because they're brand name, well-designed supplements that they sell. So if you see patented things like that at CVS and Walgreens, you can do it. But other than that, I wouldn't.
Couple of things. What about kefir?
Kefir?
Kefir, and also like something like Ensure or that kind of supplemental drink for protein. Is that something that you would recommend or not recommend people use?
Kefir, don't have a problem if you don't have dairy allergy. Kefir is cultured milk. And as long as dairy is not a problem, not a problem. Yogurt, I mean, I started my morning breaking fast with homemade soy yogurt, non-GMO soy yogurt, since I don't eat animal products. And it's full of live cultures. So that's more for the probiotic. But it will give you some protein if it's dairy and soy. If it's anything else, you're not going to get very much protein, like almond and coconut milk yogurt doesn't give you very much protein. The second question, Ensure. Ooh, don't get me started. It is not food. It is not food. So I don't recommend it. So when people, like right now I have one who's down to about 83 pounds and losing weight and just wants a quick source of calories. Give me ice cream, give me anything. It's the worst thing she can do. And Ensure is not it, but there are some really good companies if you're looking for boxed foods. Even the foods that we sell, protein products, I'm not a big fan because all of these protein products are isolated proteins unless you're just getting, say, a raw mixture of seeds that have been ground up into protein. That's totally different because that's just food that's been ground up. Other than that, I am not a huge fan. Yes. Actually, I'm an anti-fan.
I have a question about pain.
Yeah.
Sure.
My husband has IBM, and he was diagnosed,
Body myositis?
right, he was diagnosed in 2012, so he's pretty far down the progression, or lack thereof, and he's in a lot of pain. And the physicians give him gabapentin for nerve pain, and our question, it doesn't do the job, and he has a really hard time sleeping because he's in pain. So he's tried CBD oil, which is legal. Cannabis isn't yet. Perhaps someday, maybe that will help, I don't know. Another thing that's been suggested by his physician is something called battlefield acupuncture for treatment of pain. Can you respond to that? Thank you.
So the question is pain and what you do for pain associated with, in this particular case, her husband's inclusion body myositis. First, the sad news is inclusion body myositis does not have a treatment. The inclusions in muscles are formed as a result of either a toxin or viral or some kind of exposure, and it starts to cause severe deterioration of muscles. Having said that, I go back on my camp and say I'm an optimist. I don't believe that. I don't believe these diseases exist. I think we've given names to disease and we've increased our ICD-9, ICD, the very first to ICD-10 now, to literally how many? 80,000 diseases, right? So, I just refuse to believe that we don't have a cure. Like the Fortune magazine that just is beginning to show that a large % of patients with Alzheimer's can use this thing called serine and actually get better, right? And take out the toxic compound called beta-methylalanine or BCMA from their system, which comes through lots of sources. So to answer your question for pain, yes, conventional medicine uses a lot of anti-seizure medications for pain, etc. If they work, great. But if they don't, I will tell you something about CBD. CBD is good for you, but the problem is most of the CBD oils we get, you cannot get a spec sheet to know what is in it, okay? When I actually toured a warehouse locally called a company called Beleaf, and I'm not advertising for them, it was very, very interesting that I learned a lot about CBD, and that is most CBD, it's grown in open fields. Mice poop, pollen, etc. get harvested with the cones. It's pressed down to make your CBD. So people have allergic responses to it. They have problems associated. Plus, you don't know the percentage of CBD in each one of them, right? So this company has over, say, 6 to 7 years cloned 6 plants whose CBD content, it's a clone. So these 6 are clones, and its CBD content is at 15%, fairly consistent. And every batch of, say, 2,000 bottles, they spend $700 per each batch that has been made to know what is in it, right? So it really helps to know and get good quality. You can go to for your husband to Beleaf in Earth City and go pick it up, or go to their website and order it. And I would get the 1,500 bottle, where 1 dropper full is 50 milligrams of CBD, and titrate the dose. You can keep it increasing the dose every, say, 8 hours till you know what dose helps him or what dose doesn't hurt him. Because some of them have CBN, which can actually end night, helps you sleep, right? So, like if I take too much CBD, I'm sleeping. I actually missed most of Thanksgiving morning and ratted out my husband for not waking me up. I was trying samples that Palm was doling out of CBD, and I'm like, oh my God. So the kind of CBD oil you use is very important. Now, Belief is not the only company, but it's just one that I toured and know about, and they're very good about also telling you names of other companies, right? So that's for CBD. But quickly, for this group on myositis, anybody who has an autoimmune disease, I'm going to tell you something that you should do in addition to CBD. You have to add something called low-dose naltrexone. And that's a prescription, okay? Convince your physician to write it. You don't have to go and see a functional medicine doctor. This is safe. Naltrexone is used by paramedics. Let's explain that to them. It's used on the field to deal with heroin addiction. It's used for reversing morphine and heroin overdose. So it is not a narcotic, okay? But it's only available as a 50 milligram tablet, and that's not the dose you need because it will not work. What you need is about 1/10 that dose, or roughly 3.5 to 4.5 milligrams taken once daily, and then forget that you've ever taken it. Just stay on it, okay? In about 3 months, it begins to block toll receptors in your brain and in your entire immune system. And in the brain, it changes something called sickness syndrome, and that chronic inflammation cytokine, and begins to change pain. So naltrexone, along with CBD, is incredible for the treatment of pain. It has to be compounded. And here in St. Louis, I use a company called Genesis, and it's so dang cheap. For $52, you can get 90 tablets of naltrexone and get enough refills. So I usually will tell a patient, okay, get a 3.5 milligram tablet. If they have anxiety, start with CBD first for the first 2 weeks, because CBD brings anxiety down. Naltrexone doesn't cause anxiety, but in about 2%, if you're anxious already, it can really trigger that anxiety. So I have them use CBD first. Then start with half a tablet. Don't get capsules of naltrexone. Genesis is the only one who compounds in town the tablet. Break the tablet in half and take half once a day. In the United States, they usually use it at night. I tell patients to take it in the morning. Why take it in the morning? Because 37% of people will have vivid dreams. The vivid dreams does not affect sleep, okay? But if it does, just take it in the morning. If it causes a little bit of anxiety, take it in the morning. So convince your physician to write the prescription and write for 90 at a time. It is so dang safe, right? If there was one prescription I would want to take for myself, it would be naltrexone. It's safe.
How do you spell that?
N-A-L, Trex, T-R-E-X-O-N-E. If not, find an integrative physician and they'll write the prescription. It doesn't have to be a functional medicine doctor. All right, so that's what you can do for pain. I also like a lot of inflammation reducers. Inclusion body myositis is not direct inflammation, but there it's changing food. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions for me? It's a Saturday and I have time other than go start my garden.
You mentioned Palm. Would you describe for us what Palm Health is in general terms?
Yes. PALM stands for, I hope I remember this, Personalized Advanced Lifestyle Medicine. Okay? So it's in 2014, a woman came knocking at my door. My business was preventive medicine, and said, I'm looking for functional medicine doctors, and we want to start this organization. Would you come and join me? I said, no, I run a thriving business, and I'm happy, and I don't want to be working hard because I had a bad experience with BJC for 5 years. One day, I remember I was breastfeeding, saw 57 patients. My breasts were popping. I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this. I decided, okay, I turned in my resignation. Okay, so I'm like, no, if anybody takes over my practice or I sell and join someone else, I'm going to be facing exactly that. So she convinced me, and I turned her off for 1.5 years because I was doing my functional medicine boards in 2013, and then internal medicine boards, and then rheumatology boards, reboarding. So I turned her off. About 2015, she came back again, knocking at my door, and said, we really want to start this organization, and we've already purchased a building, but we need a functional medicine doctor. So at that point, I decided to sell my practice and join this group. And so functional medicine and lifestyle coaching called Anthropedia. Anthropedia worked out of St. Patrick's Center. Anthropedia is a well-being coaching program that is fairly well-known internationally, especially in Sweden and Europe, merged to form Palm Health. And to that, they added an exercise facility, a gym, cryosauna, infusion services, laser, and a full cafeteria with nutritionists to form Palm Health. So it's a concierge model. Concierge means the basic, if you want to see a doctor alone, the charge is $2,100 once a year, and we take the rest of it is taking your insurance. And if you want to use everything, use the gym, use the sauna, etc., then it's $3,000 a year, and you also get to see the physician. Certain services like cryo, for example, you pay, but it's discounted when you're a member. So that's what Palm Health is.
How many people in
staff? We started with about 25, and I can't even count them. There's so many. We just April 1st, are going to open the second center in New Jersey. The aim is to open 15 such centers, and it's to deliver this kind of care. Yeah, so yeah, we actually don't, I as a physician, one of the things my pet grouse about working there is I don't have an office, I don't have a space that I can call my own, because it's just grown so fast. The first year was a little bit slow, but then it's grown so rapidly that my motto is I'm going to take care of myself, and I cannot work myself to death. Having said that, last night I went to bed at 3 o'clock finishing up charts. But I can't do that very often. So we're restricting the numbers of patients. I mean, you still can get in, but my old patients who I grandfathered in, I had to let go and say, I'm sorry. I mean, unless you join as a medical member or a total member, you can't do it. Yeah. Yes.
If you might recall, I was a former patient of yours, and at the time, you wasn't accepting insurance.
Yes.
Did I hear you say that Palm accepts insurance?
So the model when you do integrative medicine is you either don't take insurance because insurance comes in your way, or you take insurance and charge a fee. So Palm is you charge the fee up front, and then they eat the rest, because they have huge funders, they have investors, and they're running a business model, and they hope in about 5-10 years they'll start to accrue some money. But they have funding. That's the only way you can do that kind of a model. So yes, they do. Like for example, I never used to take Medicare when I was seeing you. I do now take Medicare, especially if you're straight Medicare and not one of the Medicare Completes or Advantage plans. If you're the Advantage plan, then you have to be referred to me. But I can't be your primary care. So this model is really like looking at primary care. I've always hated calling myself a rheumatologist, even though I keep up with the training, because you are not just your muscles. You are not just your mitochondria. Really, it's that connection of everything, right? So I can't call myself a rheumatologist and not do these other things and say, let's push it off to the primary care. Well, the primary care is not doing it. So, so it really is that whole model way of thinking, as opposed to, just always wanting to eat chicken legs or breast of the chicken and not the whole chicken. Yes.
I was really interested in I sound awful in a microphone. Hi. I was really interested in what you said about the cold therapy, that only 30 seconds could be enough. I've read some of the Windhoff, yes. And the study I saw was pretty extreme. These men were like up in a mountain for days, shivering for hours, naked. But
but you can see. I mean, look at his physique. Look at
right.
his endurance. Let me talk a little bit about him.
So 30 seconds a day is enough for a normal person.
No, 30 seconds, it's better than nothing, right? It's better than nothing. So my way, and I'm not really good at this, is I like grounding myself. So I take off my shoes and socks and go. I don't spray chemicals in my lawn and go walk in your lawn. Try doing that in winter. It is hard. I can take 30, 35 seconds when the ground is frozen. And then you want to like, I'm just going back in. But as much as you can expose yourself, 3 minutes in the cryo sauna has been shown to be enough, but there the temperatures do get down to about negative 120. Yeah. Yeah, it's literally you're in this small little chamber and nitrogen is being poured in, so it's a gas, and your head is about. But if you happen to get it down, like I sometimes do, I get really claustrophobic, and the smell of nitrogen takes up oxygen, and you feel like, oh my God, I'm getting short of breath. So usually I'm in there, jumping, turning. And Daniel or whoever's there is really good. They'll kind of keep talking to you and distracting you, or let's start singing, let's do anything. And before you know it, it's like 3 minutes. Like, okay, 15, 10, 5, done. You're done. So it does help, and I sometimes use it like when I go on long trips, like to India, to prevent jet lag. The cryosauna is incredible. Yeah. Yes. Any other questions? Dennis?
I have IBM, and the lady back there says her husband has a lot of pain. I don't have any of that. I have IBM without pain, except when I fall. And because I'm tall, that's a big deal. So that's why I have this expensive wheelchair, because I can't walk. I'm about in my 7th year, which my doctor said 7 years I wouldn't be able to walk. So how can it vary so much? How come her husband has the pain and I just, I don't have it, but I'm not happy with not being able to walk? Why are there variations of all this that close?
I started my talk by saying we're all genetically unique and have unique exposures to environment. So the same disease does not present the same way in everybody. Rheumatoid arthritis is not one disease. Lupus is not one disease. God forbid, type 2 diabetes is not one disease. The disease is what is in the person. So your unique genetic issues, what you came into prior to inclusion body myositis makes you or breaks you. Determines what you can get. Yeah. And I can't fully answer that question and say I know for sure, but that's a model of thinking about it. Yes.
What's your opinion or thoughts on acupuncture and how it fits into your model?
I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question about the acupuncture. So acupuncture is a tool. Remember, functional medicine is a heuristic, and you can be a doctor practicing functional medicine and using any tool from shamanism to acupuncture, right? So if the tool is beneficial to the patient, I'm oblivious. So if a patient comes and tells me that this and this worked, what should my response be? I'm a team player, right? So my thing is, look, if it really works, let's document that. And I want to go research it. I want to know more about it. So talking about acupuncture is fairly good for pain management, right? But again, it depends on the kind of pain there is. So if in inclusion body myositis, the muscles are really so weak that it just hurts to even stand, and that's causing the pain, will acupuncture alone fix it? Probably not. Maybe it might help 20, 30%. But if you have pain that is 10 out of 10 and you brought it down to 7, is that intensity lowering better than not lowering it? I think it is. So I think it's a valuable tool. Plus, I think, remember I said you are an energy being as well. And acupuncture is shifting energy in your body. When you shift energy, certain organs work better. The mitochondria is one such very sensitive to energy. It's very sensitive to light energy. Any organ, so the electron transport chain is made of something called cytochromes, just as your hemoglobin is made of chrome. Anything that has that word chrome in it, okay, or has red pigment in it, is going to be very light sensitive. So we could use a kind of acupuncture with red light, or we could use laser light for it. So yes, I happen to think very highly of acupuncture, but I don't think you could use a single technique. Acupuncture is only a tool. Nutritional supplementation is only a tool, right? So you can have a toolbox that has hundreds of tools, but you use the one that's most appropriate to the patient. And if it works for you, I'm not going to argue with it.
Excuse me, Doc. Are you conducting any clinical studies, trials?
Oh, I'm not a researcher. I love patients. I am definitely a patient-oriented. I've done one clinical trial in my life. Actually, I started my WashU, ended my rheumatology fellowship with 4 years of working in the lab. I was going to be cloning murine or mouse model interleukin 14. The study went crazy. There was no such protein that my mentor had created, so I spent 4 years doing nothing. But I don't think it was 4 years doing nothing. It taught me a lot about immunology. But I'm not a bench researcher. I've done one other trial, and that's TACT, the trial to assess chelation therapy, and participated in it. It's a chelation therapy for coronary artery disease. So I don't have the time in my life to do clinical trials, but I like one-on-one patient, and I like doing things like this. Yeah. Other questions? You've been really intelligent, and I can't believe that you all have stayed awake.
Thank you, Dr. Toad. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy you sent them. So we'll try to keep them in our group here and try to. I'd like to do more of this.
Yeah, I'll tell you how important it is to belong to a group. There are studies that show that if you belong to a group, and it's not a group to just look at the best wheelchair or the best, but it's a group to constantly advance what you're doing. It is extremely healing. People live longer who participated in groups, and this was looking at cancer studies, this was looking at survival from autoimmune diseases. So definitely be part of the group. And that's one of the, I told my patients who couldn't come, don't worry if you're not coming to listen to me, because you do it in the clinic anyways, but come because it's really important to be part of a group, and not just because Linda is a friend, but because group support is huge. And once you start learning, I prefer that you come and say, hey doc, you talked about naltrexone, but you didn't put me on it. Did you forget? I'm like, oh, you know what? Yes, I did. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So we can do more of these nutritional things if you like. And I'm very honored to have you come and talk to us. Thank you so much. Yeah. So.